Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, the response time seems really good. I was concerned about it.
So yeah, these are some legit Headmaster players.
Yeah, I want to see a pro montage.
Yeah, some of this is from E3, the first year it launched. And then that's when I lived in Portland. We did some stuff with the Portland Indie Game Squad. They had a cool game night at a bar, and it was just kind of like a walk around thing, and so we set up there. So, yeah, the game's pretty unique even still, and so we were working on some other things, and then it kind of occurred to us like, hey, what if we started working on Headmaster again, and what if we made some levels and took the guys that have started working here and just put the game at them and saw what happened. And so yeah, it's been a really cool kind of revival so far. We've only launched what we called a blank update, but it was supposed to just be a Unity update, and one thing snuck into the PlayStation build that was like a mode from the PC, and then it ended up getting picked up by the press, which was completely unintentional. So hopefully we didn't blow our opportunity at an article on our next update, but we're trying to not play the normal PR game on this one, and like we really are trying our best to not save up things for too long and kind of just like roll stuff out when we want and not be stressed out about it. So, but as part of that, we started thinking about what was in this game that was interesting besides the game, and some of the tooling and ways that we build the game seemed to be interesting to the guys that have just started here. And I was there from the beginning of Headmaster, so a lot of it seems like old news to me, but seeing the perspective that these guys have makes me kind of appreciate it again. So I want to talk about it. So yeah, I mean, the game is a fairly substantial title. It's got 44 single player levels and 8 multiplayer levels, and so around 6 hours. I don't know. Luke Charlton just played through it. I don't know if you timed yourself, but it seemed like it took you.
It was like very much so.
Yeah, I think it took you the better part of 2 days of play, and then the party mode stuff kind of is extra on that. And the party mode seems to be a little stickier because it's those levels are designed to be sort of unmasterable, I guess, or not, certainly not to the extent that the single player levels are. So I want to talk about the kind of the tools in the game that make us able to make the game. That's the area of interest here. And so I'm going to walk forward from the beginning of the game to where we're at now. So in the beginning, it was just me, and I kind of discovered this mechanic of heading soccer balls, and spent quite a while actually trying to determine if this was actually a real video game and what the structure of the game was. So things that existed at that point were just heading a ball, seeing it go where I want, hit things that are somewhat interesting, and so on. But where it started to get to where I wanted tools for myself were, once I wanted to make levels, I wanted to be able to iterate on that more. I wanted to be able to, without a ton of screwing around, like lay out where the levels or where the targets were, change what the scores on them were, and so on. And then even while I was still by myself, I realized that these levels that you see normally in Headmaster are not very big. And so in a way, you're kind of building a meal of several dishes that you consume in order. And so the game is really about taking each of the levels, kind of similar to mobile games, like how Angry Birds would have you walking from level to level. And that there's many reasons why the order matters. The mechanics that you present, the elements that you show, you want them all to get laid out in a deliberate way so that people, can appreciate what's going on. So at a certain point, then it became, okay, add a team. And I think anybody that's worked in Unity knows that as soon as you get a team going, you need to start thinking about how to break your game up into multiple scenes. For the longest time, Headmaster was one scene, and all the individual levels that you saw were different game objects that were activated and deactivated, and that worked fine. But at a certain point, you need to be able to say, hey, you work on this, you work on that, and you got to break the game up. Now things have gotten a little bit easier with nested prefabs. There's different ways to do it. But back then, we were composing the scenes, and that's still how the game is structured. And ultimately, we needed to take a whole team, get the mechanics, get the progression, have multiple scenes, and then iterate on builds that we could get through QA and with a hard deadline of October 13th, 2016 to get the game out. So kind of in order, I'm going to walk through like the different ways that all these things manifest into tools in the game. And I'm going to actually go into Unity and show you all the different bits. And so probably you can think of it as like, 4 main parts, hopefully about 10 minutes each. And I'm going to kind of just touch on things, and then we can talk about things freeform afterwards. So the first thing I'm going to do is, and I actually have to start Unity because I've restarted this computer like 100 times lately. So let me do that while I'm talking about this. You could see from a level, at least in the bit that we played there, that the game is about launching soccer balls at your head and hitting targets and getting points. And so the composition of a level is some number of launchers, some number of targets, some number of score that is your target score of what you're trying to achieve. And then that is all kind of composed into a series of moments that we call HM Unity events, which is like, if you think of any game that you have like a linear timeline of like beginning of level to end of level, it's similar to the Unity like event life cycle of a mono behavior, but this was more spread out over an entire level. So, an entire level that you'd play. So we'd have like the pre-wave start, and waves are what we call levels. You'd have then wave start, then round end, and round begin, and so this whole thing is split up that way. But I will show. So I'm going to show you. Hang on a sec. No idea why that is not showing, so I will. Oh, it's right here. So, okay. We're in the demo. I'll talk about this tool that I'm using in a moment, but first thing I'm going to do is actually just load up a level. All right. So, a Headmaster level, once I get done compiling NP Toolkit 2, very important to show that right now. A Headmaster level is, like I said, a bunch of targets. Here, I'll make that big. A bunch of targets, a launcher, and then it's pretty simple. The balls come out of the launcher and they fire at your head, and then some number, and you head them into the goal, or you hit the targets and you get points. So the way that you build a level is basically by dragging around these parts and giving them different values. So just in that respect, there was quality of life stuff to do here. So each of these targets is represented in the hierarchy as a single game object, and these are prefabs. Hang on, something is... So one of the things that we did that made this easier was when I select any of these targets, you'll notice that I go into the second child in there. And so that is, oh, sorry, there's some confetti. That is a little known thing in it's an attribute in the C# files called selection base. So if you ever had a object in a hierarchy that you want to be the thing that you select, you can put an attribute called selection base on it, and it'll make sure that single object, the object with that component, is selected. So this component target is kind of the master of what gets hit when the ball gets sent out. And the way that we broke this up was kind of interesting in that, obviously you want to be able to set a score. And so right here, that says 30. If I change that to 50, it updates at TextMesh Pro, in real time in the editor, so that you don't have to go and manually make that look a certain way. Then there's this other part where we can change the size. We can make it small, medium, or large. And then there are a number of scriptable objects that define what type of target it is. So a score target obviously just shows the numbers. We could make it be a beach ball. We could make it be a power ball. So the way that these things work is that so if I go and look at each of these objects, this is just a scriptable object with a bunch of configuration data on it. And it tells the target, so a ball hits a target, and it's basically like, hey, what is the data that I hit? And then it consumes it in a certain way. So this makes it so that if you want to template the target types that you have, you can pass them around to the rest of the game, and you're going to get consistent behavior. So that's like, all of our target stuff kind of passes through that system. And so then that means that, if I want to make a new target and pass it around the world, then I just start cloning stuff and laying it out. So launchers also have some debug stuff where they show the rough arc of the ball. They know where they're headed. This is where the camera is, so you can kind of like line stuff up like that. So let me see what else we got in here. Yeah, and then as far as like the life cycle of stuff, there are events that get called. And so I was talking about how we have a number of like named events, and we didn't go so far as to like order these in a nice way, but basically who's familiar with Unity events in Unity? So these are this thing that got pulled out in the UI system originally, but they're a very handy way of calling other code through the inspector instead of making manual C# assignments. And we kind of ended up with a rule, and I think you might find this if you ever do level-based games, that if you could build a whole level without writing new code, like you've done a good thing. And so our QA ended up being able to really just, hone in on, as soon as we could say, I have not edited any code and made a new level, you were probably at like 75% QA-able at that point. It would be pretty hard to break things. So what we would do in the construction of a level is keep a number of events around and then call Unity events after that. So what happens in this one is that all the targets go face down, and then at wave round begin, this one target right here wakes up and comes up, and that's the first target that you're supposed to hit. So we can make these sequences of things. And then in the rest of the game, you've got targets that have events on their hit, so you can do interesting things like chain the hit of one target to the wake of another one and create these interesting patterns. So that all, I'd say if I were going to summarize that whole thing of what those pipelines are like, it is Unity events, try to avoid writing code, and then use the HM Unity events, which really is like a centralized event dispatcher that handles the life cycle of a level. So, and there were other ways that we handled the life cycle. We did things with Unity event sequences, which this is something you can implement in any game really, which is you have a list of Unity events, and each one, you might actually make a class out of it, where you can step through. And so you say, at step 1, run these events. Then at step 2, run these events. At step 3, run these events. And then all your top level thing does is say next, next, next. and that gives you the ability to handle basic sequencing that typically you would do through straight up code. So I think that probably that stuff is it's useful, but it's actually very necessary. I'd say the thing that maybe started to get into the real quality of life stuff that I even built when I was the only one working on it was what I had initially called the wave bank editor, where a level was called a wave for some amount of time, and a wave bank was the collection of them and in progression. And so I realized pretty early on that I had no idea what the order of these levels was going to be, and I needed to be able to mess around with it a lot. So Unity has since built in, but at the time didn't have this reorderable list component. But right now, I think you can use that straight up in it's already included. But basically, the way that this all goes is that the levels themselves, or the waves, are in a hierarchy, and each one of them is a single game object that kind of represents the root of the level. And so what was cool about this thing is that I could kind of play the game in shorthand by stepping through these levels. And that would let me really think about what things are visible right now? Like, what does the player know? What have they seen so far? And so being able to kind of visually snapshot, like, okay, there's this, okay, we see the keeper, okay, this is a little more complicated, now we're getting the bombs, like that just in and of itself, being able to flip through, get the lighting to update itself, really helped me to hone in on how these things would be consumed in sequence. And this tool, really, all it's doing is activating and deactivating these game objects, but there is some structure where ultimately at the top level there is a mono behavior called wave bank that holds a list of all these things, which you do end up having to add manually, and then there's a bunch of backing stuff about that. So one of the cool things about this is that I can actually even go beyond this scene and jump through the whole progression. And we can even show the entire progression of the game right here, including some of the party mode levels. So not only, and I'll talk about this more later, but not only did this let us get a sense of progression within a certain scene, but it gave us a look at progression of the whole game and the ability to bounce around kind of a little bit more easily. So waves and Wave Manager are just they are really just the way that the game flow is represented. So, over and above the levels themselves, there's something that's kind of controlling the progression from one to the next. And I'll admit, I don't think we have any shame. Our game is controlled by coroutines. It's several classes of nested coroutines, all operating in beautiful unison. No problems with that at all. It's completely readable. And, if you want to look at our code sometime, then you can come look at it. In hindsight, I can't think of a better way to make a time-based game with a life cycle than coroutines. I mean, maybe if you had some kind of like node-based visual graph, you could do it, but we had a certain set of logic that we wanted. We wanted to be able to say, oh, if you have passed this level and you don't have enough stars yet, then we should play this VO to tell you that you need to get more stars, and then we should bump you back to the level that would get you stars if you happen to want to play it. Like, we do all this sort of convenience stuff because in VR, we're just trying to keep people playing and, not have them be dealing with menus as much as we can. So there's kind of an area between like the progression of a single scene and this stuff and how do you break that up across scenes? And this is something that I think you could take away as a general philosophy, and I see this like over and over in Unity, and that is pairing of mono behavior, like game object stuff, with scriptable objects. So I think scriptable objects can represent a persistence to your game structure and to like how you allow the decoupling of things that I don't know, I just keep seeing it happen. And so I'm going to show you some of the scriptable object backing that makes all this stuff run. Because when we were just one scene like this, it was really difficult to like collect that data anywhere. You couldn't you didn't want to go and open up every scene and say, hey, scene, what game objects are in you, like every time you wanted to say, for example, like ask this question of how many levels are in this thing and where are they and what are they named, and you want to do stuff like, hey, how many total stars do I have right now? You want to be able to ask questions about the data. So when you're doing a level-based game with a lot of levels, you're going to start thinking about, at some point, how do I externalize the data that is inside a Unity scene to the outside? And so people have different choices. You could write out XML, you could make your own text file, you could store it online somewhere. But we chose to use scriptable objects because they're able to hold references to Unity objects, which is super convenient, and they let us reference each other. And so when we think about okay, take a level here, it doesn't have any awareness of any scriptable object backing. So we got to go up one level in the hierarchy of data to start thinking about okay, where in this does it hook into an overall data structure? And so here is what we would call the wave bank data. And so if I look at this has got a wave data list, and this is basically all the metadata about every level or every wave inside this bank. And the nice part about this is not human created. It is made by hitting this button, and then the button goes and writes all this data out. And so for every one of these scenes, there is a backing scriptable object that you create once, and then whenever you go do anything in here, you hit this update button, and it updates everything. So what is the name of the level? What image should it show when you look at it on the menu? What's its nickname, star scores, other things that we didn't end up implementing. And that ultimately goes into a list, hey Fisher, that we called the global progression data. And so as you can imagine, this is just a list of all of the wave bank data. And ultimately, this list of every level in the game is just pulling from this global progression data here. And so that right here is the game. This represents the beginning of the game, the tutorial. Right around here is the end of the game, and then we were lazy and piled all the party mode stuff at the end because we didn't know how else to implement it. Duncan actually had to solve that one once we started doing our update. So all this stuff basically would, let me check my notes here. So yeah, you got wave data, wave bank data, progression data, and yeah, that pretty much if you want to make a new level, so I might go in here and I say, hey, this, let's add a level to the beginning of the main game. So I duplicate box wall, and I'm going to call it extreme box wall. All right, and I'm going to go and take the entire box wall, and I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, extreme. All right, that could work, actually. We might ship that. So now, this has not shown up in the progression data yet. So I go up to the wave thing, and I add it somewhere in here. And actually, I think I can even do it right here. Drag this right here. and then hit set wavebank data, and it does a little bit of writing, which usually is pretty quick. And then, so then I can go through here and play it. And so at that point, you just edit your level and whatever. Now, let's say I'm like, you know what, this doesn't go in this, I don't want this to go in this bank. So I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to go all the way later in the game. I'm like, let's go to here. So load that. Don't save that. Okay, now I'm later in the game. Or actually, we should even go, well, this is an exam, so I shouldn't put it in the middle of an exam, which nobody knows what that is, but I'm just going to say we shouldn't. And so I go back here, and something's thinking.
You hit play, everyone's probably missed.
Oh, good gravy.
Oh no.
It's okay, no problem. Just starting up VR with no headset. Did I really hit play? Stop. Yeah, so what I'm trying to show here is that not only did, we want to make it so that it was malleable, like where a level went inside of a single progression. We want to make it so that if you wanted to move it, all you need to do is copy paste it. There are 0 dependencies on the rest of the level. So everything in there is self-contained. So yeah, there's extreme box wall. Take it and add it onto here and hit set wavebank data, and you're good. So we were really agile, and one of the things this let us do was not lock down our level progression until the very end, which drove us totally crazy. But did let us solve a lot of problems with player understanding when we would run play tests and see if people, had a level they got stuck on. We were shuffling things around in a very agile way. I have 0 qualms with being indecisive, quote, in the face of player feedback. You got to be able to say, hey, this didn't work as well as it could. Let's make a change. So all of our systems allowed us to do that, and then that allowed us to ask the correct questions. So I think sometimes when you don't have systems that let you sort of confidently stare these things in the face, you don't even want to ask. Like, you don't even want players to test that part of the game because you're not changing it, and so ship it. But this was a game where we were constantly changing things right to the end. So yeah, that was progression and multiple scenes. I can't think of what else would go in there. There's some stuff I wanted to talk about with VO. There's not like a lot to say here, but every level has its own VO bank that shows up in this editor. And it was just another way. Here was just a little usability story I think was kind of nice, is every level needed a VO object. And so how could I enforce that? And so the way that it was done was to make a VO object that was exactly the same name as the level, put it in a certain folder, and then this tool would just look for an object named the same. If it was there, it popped this green button. If it wasn't there, you got nothing. And so that let us walk through the whole game and be like, does this thing have VO? Does this thing have VO? So it was one of those things where when you're dealing with many, many objects, that's how you kind of stomp on all of the different issues. So yeah, then the last kind of step to that whole flow of, we've got a game, we've got progression, we've got it broken up into multiple scenes, multiple people are working on it. How do you get that done? How do you make builds? And so, I think everybody's kind of graduated at this point, from not using source control to using source control. Like, I think we all had time when we were young where we were using Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever, but then you discovered Git, you discovered Perforce if you were in a larger studio. We use Plastic SCM, but no matter what, you have source control, and that's kind of like the lifeblood of your project. But how many times have you sat there and waited for a build? You got to send a build to QA, And so you're working, and you hit build on your machine, and then you surf the web or something. And I think if you add up all the time, especially when you're getting in the bug fixing phase of a project that you spend staring at builds getting made, you realize that you need to decouple the build process from your computer. And so there's a few ways that you can do that. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is just general build etiquette, I guess might be the way. So in Headmaster, the way that a build gets made is by hitting one of these buttons here. And so the philosophy that we use is we say we have some debug settings, okay? And we actually store them in a scriptable object that's not checked into source control. So this is like your own personal debug stuff. So if you want to be able to play the game not in VR, if you want to be able to play the game like speed mode so you can get through progression, you want to skip saving data, all these things, they're all like right here, and you can mess your whole game up. But let's say that you want to make a build from your machine to test things out. But you don't have to go and like undo all of these things. So we just have a global switch that's basically like, are we paying attention to debug settings or are we not? And I would definitely advocate thinking of debug settings as like you need to have the nuclear, like no debug, everything correct switch that when you go to make a build, you're just guaranteed that none of that crap has infected your game. And so that first off was the kind of the foundation for the next step, which was how we could use that to script our builds and then take it the next step, which I'll talk about after. So ultimately, there is one file in the game called Headmaster Build, which contains a bunch of methods that are, and I'll load it up. I don't know if there's going to be much use in looking at it, but we'll do it anyway. So this contains like one entry point, which is basically like build, but then various platforms, and each platform would have its own set of like setup stuff. And so when you go and hit build global release, then it's going to call a certain function in there. If debug is on, which seems to be thinking about some stuff right now, but if debug is on, this changes to build global debug and respects all of that stuff in case you want to make a build with a bunch of stuff, messed up or turned up. So yeah, I don't think there's a ton to really check out in here, but it grabs the progression data, knows how to make a build itself, and basically if you just walk through this whole thing, you see there's builds for PS4, builds for various things. I probably don't want to show certain keys that show how to do builds for our stuff. But yeah, so that's mostly in reference to if you're sitting at your computer and you want to make a good build. Not like your own, like, hey, build and run, I happen to be in the middle of a level, whatever. So, yeah, and then I'd say another thing that is a quality of life thing is there is a button in here that is add scenes to build list. Now, Headmaster Build has a function in there that is like, hey, based on all the data that I have, all those wave bank datas that have every scene with all the stuff, global, various other things, like, build that build list right here. And if you find that you are manually editing this, then that's probably bad. So this is the list of scenes for our demo. So if I go here and now I've said I want to actually do the main game, so I'm going to go and that should update if I go here. Oh, I don't know why it's not. Am I still on demo?
It changed from A to B.
Oh, is that because it's set in HM settings? It might be set somewhere else. Yeah, it's the demo flag is set in a separate piece of code. But anyway, when we're not configured to run the demo, then that will set up right. But anyway, you don't want to be editing this manually is I guess my main point. So okay, so that's like the I am making a build. I want to know it's good. But with that, once you have that, then that gives you the capability of automating it from an external source. And so the most simple way to think of that is that you can run Unity from the command line and say, hey, Unity, run this static method, and Unity will open itself. It doesn't even need to show graphics, and it'll run a build process. That in and of itself is not that exciting. It is nice to be able to like go on another machine and just run a batch file and say, hey, build, and walk away. But where you really want to be is into like an actual build system. And so I don't know if anybody's heard of Jenkins, Team City. Other industries use these things for all kinds of things. But so we use Team City. And I happen to actually be working on our build machine. So I will go and show you Team City right here. So I would have to do a couple things to make the source control not show that little problem here. But basically, once you get a build system like this set up, then you can either go onto a web GUI. So anybody in the office can get this web panel up and just say, run a build, and that will run a series of scripts that will not only call Unity, but it'll talk to source control and pull down the latest. It'll talk to Unity and run the build. It'll determine whether the build was successful or a failure. It will take the results of that build and do something with it. And on PlayStation, that's not all that complicated because the PlayStation system for getting things to their back end is not super automatable. But for Steam and Oculus, it is. Steam in particular is all complete, and people that have released Steam games certainly know this. But so our system is set up to, we don't even have a place to store builds locally. When our build machine finishes, it's just like up to Steam, and then everybody on the team that needs to get that build just pulls down from Steam. So the holy grail of where you want to be with any build system is that you want at most like one button to hit, and then if all is good, you want the build to resolve itself, update, and show up in various people's places. So this was really important in the earlier parts of Headmaster when, before I lived in Burlington, I had a remote team. So, when you're working remote, then you really need to make sure that your build distribution is as frictionless as it can be. So I had a QA guy in Portland and, a guy I was working with in Albany. And so that paid off a lot. But I would say I probably burned, I'd never set up Team City before. I probably burned a week personally of screwing around with this thing. But I still think it was worth it. I give you a quick little tour of like what our Team City settings would look like. So one of the cool things about it is that they let you take and sort of parameterize everything. So, you take your command line for your build and make it a system call. And same with the directories and everything. So you set this all up so these are basically variables, and then each of your build steps here, this is what when the build runs, it's like, okay, do this stuff. So it deletes stuff from the Unity folder or from the build folder. And a lot of this, honestly, is just running batch files. As far as our purposes go, there's crazier stuff that you can do, but we're kind of just like running batch files and catching the results. And then I want to say one of the other parts of this that is super handy is that it can fire Slack notifications. So sometimes you'll fire off a build and you forget that you even did it. So it'll be basically every time I do it. And so this one, it'll be like, hey, build started. And then you're like, oh, la-di-da, I'm surfing the web. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, build failed. Then, you got to do something about it. So that's I think that kind of concludes kind of the survey of everything that we have in here. So
is there any reason you don't build on commit?
Yeah, if we were if we were really rigorous about keeping main as like okay, I've merged to main, that means a build must happen. That would be one thing, but we just never have been like that. I don't know. I found that every time I turn like commit detection on for builds, I will commit something and I'll be like, oh, I forgot something. And then I'll commit again, but the build started and I got to wait until the next build gets done. And I'm making 2 builds for every one. And I don't know. Usually is easy enough for me to just go and do it. But Alex.
I'm just curious, what made you decide to go with, is it TeamCity?
Yeah.
That's the Microsoft one, right?
I don't.
JetBrains, that's right.
Yeah.
What made you decide to go with that over Jenkins?
I believe it was that the plastic, so we use plastic SCM as our source control, which I could take a minute and pimp also, but the plugin for Jenkins wasn't as functional.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so when I talk about it taking a week, I think that was like trying Jenkins, having the plugin not work,
right.
Going and trying to get support,
okay.
Looking at TeamCity, yeah, so, but yeah, I mean, I was able to migrate that TeamCity installation to a way newer version on a different computer, and it all came across. So sorry for them, I haven't paid a dime for that, and I don't think that I'm supposed to. So great job, team. I really appreciate that. So
I have that set up on GitLab, and you get something like, I don't know, 2,000 hours of everything, and the guy had put together a script for their continuous integration like format or whatever, and it works.
Yeah.
So that's like another free alternative. We don't need a server in your house.
Right.
Another machine.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Unity Cloud Build is probably another way that people go, but I don't know if people do that for anything but mobile. I got the impression that Unity Cloud Build was a way of skipping Xcode, but I have not personally done that.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Hi,
Matt.
Hey, what's up? do you guys use TeamCity for any other projects? Like, is it always games?
Personally, we didn't use it for the stuff we built for you because we didn't feel that it didn't have like a tight QA loop.
It wasn't cool enough.
It basically wasn't cool enough. Yeah, and then we haven't set it up for any of our Quest stuff so far. But anything that needs to go to an external platform, I feel like is high on the list.
For like continual release.
Yeah, and like stuff that needs to get QA'd a ton.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
the multiple build environments, right, that you're setting up for PS4, like that totally makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more along the lines of like, I have this, snippet, I need to build it for Mac and for Windows.
Yeah, so that would be a good case where if you wanted to roll out like multiple platforms of something all at once, then you could certainly set Unity up to build it, switch platform, do that a bunch of times. Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm only getting into that kind of stuff when we're actually feeling pain. It's really like a way of alleviating pain and just putting it in another place. We're all familiar with that, right? Like taking your pain, putting it in another place.
I believe they call that like aggressive displacement.
Okay, yeah. I think that might be my GDC talk next year. Yeah. So I don't know. Any other? I feel like that was exactly the schedule I was thinking. Any other thoughts?
I was really curious to see how you built that tool tray in Unity.
This guy?
Yeah, that.
Well, let's look at the code. I mean, it's an editor script.
Okay.
And it uses the immediate mode GUI. So
So it's not like a plugin.
no.
Oh.
No. It does use, like I said, it uses this whacked out reorderable list that these guys, made. But I believe reorderable list made its way into mainline Unity at some point. But I didn't dare touch it because we were fully integrated with it at that point. But yeah, I mean, pretty much this is just, it starts with an on GUI that draws stuff in immediate mode. And then there's a bunch of helper functions to populate that properly. But yeah, this thing lets us swap that stuff around.
Yeah.
Get rid of it. It used to be that even dealing with arrays in Unity was like some kind of nightmare. But yeah, this all works pretty well.
That's awesome.
And like anything Unity, this is already like the old version, so it's the UI elements is the new way to do editor tooling.
Okay.
Which is
Sure.
completely different.
Yeah.
Again.
Right.
I feel like they got a new UI toolkit every 2 years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this one is hopefully will not be deprecated while we're still working on Headmaster. So yes.
Well, I still use OnGUI for certain things. I mean, it's simple.
Yeah. I mean, I think for an editor tool, it's going to be the coherent way to do things for a while.
Yeah, it'll be like 5 years before it's documented anyway.
Right. Right.
What's the deal with like people not using coroutines? Because it feels like I'm just programmer by necessity. I don't use them excessively, but they sure are useful.
So I was being facetious. Yeah. Like I think that what we did was the optimal use of coroutines. Like I think that coroutines that get like if you're using coroutines for like real time stuff and you should be doing stuff like in more of a coherent update loop. Like I think anytime you have 50 coroutines running concurrently and you don't know what one is actually like the one at a time, I think that's probably the bad case. But I think in our case, we had a very clear hierarchy. Like we had this one managing everything, and then we actually had, is it single player or is it party mode running its own thing? And so, ultimately for us, what made it complicated was that we wanted complicated rules about managing the flow. So we would just, we wanted to be able to catch you at certain points in the flow and say, hey, it's time for you to take an exam now. You have enough stars after you've been working to get them for a while. Because you think of experientially about what the player is trying to do. And in this game, like you play levels, you try and get stars. When you get enough stars, you can do a boss fight, which is called an exam. And so if you get to the point where you're gated and you can't do the boss fight, then your mission now is go get more stars, go farm stars. So you go out and you farm stars and you're playing levels and trying to get better, and then you finally get that last star, and you want the game to respond and say, hey, you did it. Okay, let's go do the boss fight now. And so that coroutine is responsible for all those checks. And that's just code, and it's got to live somewhere. And one giant coroutine, I don't know, I can read it. At least it's not in like 50 different files that are all like inheritance hell and something. It's like, it's just a lot of logic. So I don't know. I think that coroutines get a bad name. But one thing that we did, and I don't know what the current state of the art is with this, but we got a coroutine extension called Safe Coroutines. And I think it's on the asset store, but it would allow you to pause a coroutine, stop a coroutine, hold a handle to a coroutine that you could then manipulate, pass that handle places. You didn't have to deal with any of that string crap that you generally get stuck with them. So I think, maybe they've improved things in stock Unity at this point, but we just have been using that thing for a while. No, okay. And so I think as long as you have a way of being in command of them, I think that where people maybe give them a bad rap is that they kind of don't understand what's happening. And I'll admit that like I couldn't go write my own like coroutine system like from scratch like some kind of crazy man, but I do know that you just want to avoid letting them own you. So
I think the confusion comes in is people use them because they think they're multi-threaded, but they're not. So they just help you deal with the life cycle, trigger cases.
Right.
But with like the job system now, anything that you don't need on the thread, you can actually go multi-threaded. So
Sure.
when I first got into them, I was working with someone who used them all over the place, and it becomes just a mess.
Yeah.
So if you can like logically place them in areas where it makes sense, you're like, oh, this is exactly why we have to do this.
Yeah.
I had a case where I had to do stuff after late update. There's a code routine set up for that, so
Okay.
you have to
Sure.
abide by the rules and do it then. So.
Yeah. I mean, I find them to be really readable a lot of times. I mean, when you have like, okay, here's something that's very visible happening in the game. All right, yield, wait 5 seconds, and then have this happen. It's like, I don't know how I would improve the readability of that code particularly. But yeah, then if like 5 other things are going to interrupt that and make it confusing, that's a bad idea. But if you have like one master control flow, that seems okay.
Yeah, it's when you're trying to like break out of a coroutine in the
Yeah.
middle that it becomes a problem.
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
of people.
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, if you store like a reference to a coroutine, then when you need to, you can just call like stop coroutine, right? Am I
You
missing
have
something?
like 100 coroutines and it can be really.
Yeah, I haven't got there yet.
But it's like, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just you do whatever you want. Because you're God.
Sure.
That is a tip, though. I actually had to deal with this in the game I'm kind of finishing up now, is that like any of your stock coroutines, if you just create one instance, you can reuse it over and over 1,000 times, and you won't incur the garbage that it's going to happen.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
every time you do new wait for end of frame,
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
that's garbage every single time.
Sure.
But if you just have basically a global reference to that coroutine, I mean, it runs and exits and it's done. So you can just keep reusing it over and over, the same one. What was happening to me is I had a lot of cases where I was using coroutines to do certain things later in the cycle, every frame.
Right.
But that's like 30 bytes every time, multiplied by 30 frame. All
Yeah.
of a sudden I've got 1.8K every time of coroutine
Right.
memory.
Right.
So anyways, I didn't come up with that. I looked online and people were like, hey, do this. I was
Right.
like, brilliant.
Yeah. Any other random thoughts or questions about this stuff? Sean or Damon or Duncan or Luke, am I forgetting any cool things that...
I don't think you're forgetting anything. Just like the level builder could use a whole talk in of itself just for how helpful it is for making levels, because like seeing the levels laid out, I thought it was going to be a lot more of a hassle of a sequence to like actually create a level.
Mhm.
But the lack of pain for just duplicating and making a new level is just unquestionably the most helpful tool that I've experienced so far.
You guys find yourself losing track of your levels at all?
Sometimes there's actually like a couple of levels in the bank editor that are just like not in the final game and are quote the lost lessons that are just buried there. So a couple level ideas are fun to poke around and see what's there, but yeah, sometimes they can get buried away.
Yeah, I mean, there probably are levels that are unreferenced in the scenes, but are in the scenes in the shipping game. So that'd be a funny hack.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's probably possible.
I wanted to know about like when you're working on a game for a long time and you got like a bunch of content to make or deadlines to hit. How do you decide like when something needs an in-game tool or a gizmo or a GUI thing? Like how do you decide to like devote time to something like that or just like, deal with it?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm sure that there are times where you could write a tool for yourself and it would be a bad idea. Like you're doing a game jam, right? 48 hours. Okay, step 1. Write an entire like tool harness to handle all of it, and then it's like day 2. So I don't know. I guess for me, I think it's just very particular to what you're trying to design, and if you're designing as you build, because I find that, and I'd say this is an overall lesson that I learned from Headmaster, maybe more than any other game, is that the systems that you build will design the game. Like it's actually the inverse. You might have an idea about what you're going to do, but then the decision to build the systems is then the machine that will design the rest of the game. And so I think that for me, the thing that would get me to build a tool is if I needed the design help. And I felt like it would be a creative help for me to have this ability to play, like I generally get similar feelings when I build games as to when I play games. I like the play aspect of designing. And so, anytime you're playing a game and you start to get frustrated, like you want to upgrade, you want to go grind out and get, that new weapon. That's kind of when I want a tool, I want to level up my capabilities of building the game. And sometimes, you're in a level 1 dungeon and you're killing rats and it's fine. Like, you don't need a better sword. You just kill things with that dagger you have. But then it's like, okay, I want to go to the big dungeon where the what's a monster? I don't know. Name a better monster than rat. Giant rats are there. Giant man rats are there.
I think the only thing I would say, like 99% of the time in my whole career, not even just games, every dev tool is organic, and it starts off with like, here's a script with 3 lines that does something, and then it slowly grows, and then you end up with all the buttons and the thing.
Sure.
But like as you go, you keep building it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of whack-a-mole. Once you've done it 20 times, you're like, all right, I can simplify this bit.
Sure.
And then it slowly builds. Anytime I've been in companies where we try to build our dev tools first, it's just a disaster anyways.
Yeah, and
what are the requirements?
And I think that it is about design versus some of these tools are not about design. They're about just optimizing some flow. But, I'd say that the being able to reorder the waves, the tooling in the levels, that's all just like, okay, I think ideas came out of that. And sometimes when you have friction on an area, you just don't try things. So I feel like if there's an opportunity space that is unexplored, sometimes a tool will let you like confidently wade into it and try things that you wouldn't have done otherwise.
There's one thing that I like to keep in mind with just, software development in general, and it sort of comes from like engineering, which is that like anyone can build a bridge, but it takes an engineer to build a bridge that barely stands. So, sort of,
okay.
Right? But, when you're thinking about it, it's like, okay, well, that means it's minimum resources. It's probably going to last, right? Like, it's still good. It does its job. So, at first, you just build, your tower of toothpicks that's held together with gum. And then once you have an idea of what it's actually supposed to look like and what you have to do to bring it into the next step, that's when you're going to figure out what tools you actually need.
Sure.
When do you decide that like you're like romancing your tool too much?
Whoa, that really cuts right to the heart of it, man.
So I mean, like for instance, you've got like tons and tons of options, right? For something that you initially set out to do that was very simple, right? You might hit a button and be like, go.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you're like investing more and more time. Like you have all your options. Your investment into this tool is like you're like starting to expand on it, and then like you have that pressure weighing down on you. Like, when is Unity gonna build this tool? My shit is gonna be obsolete.
Well,
I wasted all this time in the fucking Unity system.
Right. I mean, all that your question makes me think is like every time I ever was working without a deadline. Like, if you have a deadline, then you generally will feel the pressure to stop the noodling, and you'll stop. But when you don't have a deadline, then it's like, oh, that font could be better, on my tool. So, yeah, I think even we found lately that, we'll go into prototyping and not have a deadline, and it like kind of gets aimless. I feel like maybe the overall rule for all of development is make yourself deadlines that are real so you can make good choices. That does cut deep. Oh, it hurts, but it's true. Yeah.
It's some really real personal things.
Professor Buckstein,
Greetings.
thank you for joining us. Any other thoughts of wisdom? What about other studios? Is do you guys, like Ryan? How does your tooling philosophy work at Sunday Month?
We get by on raw skill. Like, I'm not joking. Like, we have tools that come up and down sometimes, but I think we're trying right now to improve our like tooling pipeline. So like, but up until this point, we've just gotten by like on raw effort, honestly.
Sure.
We do have a lot of tools that we use. I'm not currently working on a game though, so what's going on in Paparazzi? Have we started building any tools?
Yeah, a couple. We are about to start up like a new interaction system, and the plan is to build a tool around that. We haven't actually begun yet.
Well, let's use DagQuest as an example, because we did in fact build tools for DagQuest where we don't. It seems that we spend a lot of time in pre-production, or what we like to pretend is pre-production was actually development. In DagQuest, at least, you needed a level editor in order to do stuff. We needed a build pipeline. We made it so that every time you built the game, it was not made in Unity, by the way. Every time you built the game, you had a usable build. And it just happened to that we made it build very quickly. It took like 3 seconds to build DagQuest. So anytime you built DagQuest, you could deliver that build. If you wanted to use certain debug functionality, you just flipped a switch, sort of like this, and it just turned on debug mode.
Right.
But our tools, I think I wish we could spend, Rob works for us basically now, and Rob is like a tools expert, so we're trying to introduce the use of like more effective tooling into our pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because we started making games like middle of college, a lot of that philosophy is still the way that we handle things. Luckily, we've been able to get people into using like source control and stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of our artists, we still have to kind of get them on the drive. Sometimes with their art assets or working off of our local server directly.
Yeah.
And it can be a headache.
Yeah.
We've been looking, actually it's been many months that we're looking for a CD solution, or CI solution. So with Team City, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And that seems like a pretty compelling option, but that's,
Specifically with our tools, it's we make them when we need them.
Right.
The problem is usually we change our mind so often that we don't need them.
Yeah.
Because we never finish.
Well, I think that the tools philosophy, I don't know, I think our guys have seen, I was a tech artist for many years, and I'm just very pipeline and tool centric, and I think of that as how the game exists, but other people they'll make the game out of cardboard to start, and they'll know exactly what they want to make, and they'll go and just implement that, and it's already proven out as a paper game.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting. So at Sunday Month, you'd be surprised how stable our games are.
Mm-hmm.
If you really looked at how we made them. But yeah, our games are. I would just say that you make a tool when you need it. Some people find that they need tools, but then they change their mind a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So the tool becomes obsolete even though they would have needed a tool.
Right.
And I think that's sort of how a lot of our games, at least in this generation, have been going. Our older games, we were making them on those deadlines like you were saying, so we just made exactly what we needed.
Yeah.
And I think learning to set deadlines is probably the biggest factor that determines how many tools you make. If you don't have any strong or serious deadlines, which we have a bit of trouble because we're all very close friends and everyone's the same age, it can be really difficult to be there's an actual deadline come out. You need to decide if you're going to make this tool right now or if you're going to just make the game.
Yeah.
And that's actually a problem that we're having right now. I have a meeting about it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I feel like there's kind of a bracket on the tool question. On one hand, there's the I know I could use it, but I have a deadline, and I have to weigh the cost benefit. But then the other one is I'm currently stuck I feel like there's so much friction in things I'd want to try, but I can't prove anything out. If I had a good tool, I could try a bunch of things really quick and find the right answer.
Yeah.
And that one can be a lifesaver for morale when the team doesn't know what to do otherwise.
And
So
then there's like when you have both. When like you can't get the answer, but the tool you gotta learn is like ANSYS.
right.
Like so over your head that the time investment will like, it's like coming up to like a brick wall that's like a mile high.
Yeah, that's like back to what you were saying about your tools kind of design your game. If you can't make the tool, then you can't make that game, probably.
Right. Like, can you use AI? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like there's two like main, or there's many categories of tools, but a lot of the tools that I've used or developed or anything in those regards have been in two major categories. It's either a tool that helps design your game, where it's like the entire game functions and how you build the game functions based off that tool, kind of like that editor in the bottom right there. And then there's other just like convenience tools for just like either organizing objects, organizing your project, or just like shortcuts. And I think there's just such a wide variety of like tool categories where it could be from anywhere just like a little helpful thing for like like balancing, I don't know, like a enemy spawn ratio and when things will spawn in. Something like that will be nothing that designs the game, but just something that will help you. Where like tools like the level editor and Headmaster and the wave bank editor are like more of those larger tools that are more backbones. So I think there's like a wide category of like when you decide to use it and like why are you using it and when it becomes useful.
Here's one that we did, which might be an inspiration for the people that are less tooly. Was we started putting confetti on targets that were like high value, or we wanted to reward the player. But the process was, okay, take this particle system, put it on the target, hook up a Unity event, get it all going, and like it took a little time. So now we have add confetti like scripts, which actually are key bound. So you could select any target, and what is it? Control Shift X. There it is, confetti on that target. So you can add confetti to all the targets.
I'm gonna use this.
Yeah, you're.
Wow.
That actually brings up a really good point about having too many tools, though, is that then you need to write documentation so that people know what tools exist.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, no, we believe.
Teach us how to do that.
How to what?
I really think we need that.
Write documentation or confetti?
Whatever's driving confetti.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty simple one. And then the other one was we ended up with the targets in the wave ending up being indecipherable, like what was what. So this one will go through the whole wave and name them properly. I think it works. Let's see. So target, what do we got? Wave, rename targets.
I like that.
Okay, look at that. Now I know what they are. It's a score target.
Oh yeah, I use
So.
stuff like this all the time. So I guess if we consider like little snippet things as tools.
I'd say a tool is something that you wrote that you can do in the editor that doesn't show up in the game.
Then at least I definitely have a lot of small tools, but I don't really build Windows too frequently. That's why we hired Rob.
I feel like no matter how storied the game is, your like tools menu is always called custom.
Well, I had to see if we had done it in custom or in tools. So.
Every single shader I've ever written, it doesn't matter the project or how I'm working on the project, they're all under custom / whatever game stuff is.
Yeah.
So what I will throw out there, if you embrace scriptable objects, like I've avoided writing. So the particular project I was working on, I had all these mechanics, you wanted to adjust them all and stuff, and I could have went that way, but just converting everything to scriptable objects, basically you're configuring the provider, the strategy for everything.
Yeah.
And so the code can kind of pull it from everywhere, but Unity kind of gives you a free built-in UI. You know, your emails can show up, you got booleans, you got all that tooling already for free in the scriptable object. So whereas I may 2 years ago have built a UI, you can, if you think about it for a second, you can use those scriptable objects really. Like you're already doing it in a lot of cases.
Right. Yeah. And they've made certain things even easier. Like now you put an attribute on certain fields and get a slider out of them,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
that if they keep doing that, like
It's a lot of free stuff, right?
yeah, I totally will take that. So yeah, I mean that's how this debug. Like yeah, I mean it would have been. I don't think we ever really got a debug menu going in the game. No debug. Like I think there might be a console, but we don't really use it. So yeah, this is the free UI for setting up all of the debug stuff. So
I think another good way to judge value when you're thinking about a tool is like, and you don't always have the luxury to do so, but just think about, will I be able to like theoretically use this tool for other projects, like without
Sure.
doing too much of it, like, because if so, that shows that your tool isn't about something so contrived that it's probably not worth it.
right.
And you can think long term. Like we've used a similar layout for this debug system in other projects, and it came super in handy, and
Right.
we didn't have to spend much time on it at all because we've already done it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd say that we have a lot of tools like that as well. They can start impacting your design of the games that you make after, like depending on how like ingrained that mindset is. So it
Mhm.
can be dangerous to make tools that like seem like they'd be useful for multiple projects, but could just like start pigeonholing you into certain types of designs.
Hmm.
Like we have or at least my teams at Sunday Month have something called a scene wizard, which allows you to have like multiple scenes that you can just press a button to open them all up together, so you can associate scenes together.
Hmm.
So we have a manager scene that has all the managers that are global, that holds all of those scenes. I have like a scene transition scene that handles all of the scene transitions,
Hmm.
and you can just like load all of those things together. But it has kind of impacted how some of my prototypes are being made,
Sure.
and that's like can be impacting like how creative you get
Right.
some of your game ideas.
Right.
Does your confetti tool
Make fun
make you
tools.
want to make confetti games?
100%.
I mean, like, when is it too much?
Yeah.
Even the architecture, however that confetti tool works, I'm
Yeah.
sure it can be used for other similar things. But you want to
Sure.
add a thing quickly to another thing.
Yeah. We tend to always have a scene called Global. I don't know if that's Bootstrap would go before Global in the event that you need something. So we have Bootstrap, Global, and then whatever.
Yeah, that was the reason we made the
Yeah.
scene manager, is so that we had basically a bootstrap scene that
Yeah.
would just happen before and load up all the other scenes that you need to see new things are happening in a certain order.
Right.
For persistent data or for like singletons.
Sure. Well, that's all I got. Does anybody else have any other words of wisdom on tools or?
And what's the tool master have to say?
Well, I mean, I've been mostly observing. I definitely like seeing editor windows. I would say that one of the things I've gotten into more recently is maintaining data statically in my editors a lot more, and I've started to mess with Unity editors like update loop and things like that in order to just basically get it so anything I'm messing with at any point in time in one window is accessible globally across the project. Because more and more often I need to have several editor windows that I'm both working on at the same time and that I would hand off to a client to use at the same time, which I've started to call like suites, basically. Like I would save it in a layout like on the top right where I pair several windows together, and I'm not actually integrating them like embedded like how you have yours kind of on the bottom right there. I leave them like floating out front. Usually I'll bring them to the other monitor. But like we had an inventory, or not just inventory, but like an item manager, drop table simulators, a bunch of like smaller tools like that. But
That project failed.
yeah, that project was like
So
unrelated.
there were
to
a lot of
the
good tools in that
but-
project.
Yeah.
But that project didn't.
Yeah. The actual like layout of things, and yeah, just like basically choosing which data I want to make static, so that I can access it from anywhere, open windows from other windows, close them. Yeah,
We basically don't use Unity anymore. We use whatever Rob makes.
Yeah,
Right.
I definitely kind of take it in a different direction, I feel, for tools. But yeah, my rule of thumb also for when I should make a tool is the second I start doing inheritance in Unity, I want a visual editor that just will hide that for me so that I can choose what's being displayed.
Oh, you mean in a mono behavior like in the inspector, you don't want to carry along all the garbage from the base class?
Pretty much the second I inherit from any class that's not mono behavior or scriptable object, I start creating my own custom inspectors. And then the second I want to automate any kind of process or handle any kind of like list of data,
Right.
I just got to make a tool because I just started to kind of think in terms of
Sure.
tools also.
Have you figured out an easy way to make a field read-only?
There is a read-only tag, I think.
Does it work?
Read only.
Oh, actually, no, I templates. I don't do that.
The read-only, is it an attribute?
Yeah, there's a read-only.
I just go private serializable, but still you can mess with it.
Is there a read-only attribute?
I remember I had to
Already?
download like a small extension that would make it read-only and show up in the inspector,
Yeah.
like grayed out.
Oh,
So
yeah.
That's what I want. That's what I
That
want.
does exist.
It does.
I stumbled across that. I didn't.
Because I think I looked for it, and it was like, yeah, to put a little editor code in, and I don't know, I kind of gave
remember why
up.
I stopped using it. There
Yeah.
was some problem.
I wanted something that was like, I want to be able to switch modes on an inspector view for like, hey, I'm the programmer that's programming this thing, or like, hey, here, user of such thing.
What about
Like,
debug inspector only? Because that's one I use.
well, that's what you would, I think that's what most people use now for that, but you get way more than you bargain for when you turn debug
Yeah.
on, so, yeah.
Could definitely use more tools for debugging.
We should definitely just have like a tools roundtable.
Yeah, I wish that you could just add modes to this. It was like normal, debug, designer, you know, and it was just like artist, right? It's just a picture of a cat, right? Sorry.
No, I think what you could do then, there's a couple of things that I was messing around with, which just is like a unique inspector. Like not using Unity's inspector anymore. It's like
Yeah.
some Odin inspector.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
That's just the only thing I could think of. But where, for example, I don't use the console, like that console. I have a custom console that I use, which allows you to like make things like much squatter.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can see like 1,000 more.
Text actually wraps and it
Yeah.
doesn't. You don't have to fucking.
But you can
Slide
probably
on
just
it and
make
shift
the
over.
inspector, and then maybe make inspector modes that you can make so that people can only edit certain types of code.
Yeah.
Or fields. Yeah. Granted, at that point, our game is probably done.
Right.
So that's usually where the tools like stop being useful.
Totally.
I think I do have one more thing. Making tools for non-level based games is a big headache, and something that doesn't really make level based games. I haven't seen like a good talk about, or from anyone, about making tools for something that is more like long form and like flowing between states as opposed to like having discrete level chunks.
Yeah.
So that could be something we could talk about in like another one sort of situation like this.
Sure. Do you mean more of like generative, like?
Yeah, like a
Open-
procedurally
yeah.
generated thing, or even just like an art game of some sort.
Sure.
As opposed to like I guess this is a good example of a game
Right.
that has like discrete chunks of content.
Yeah, I feel like my first thought with almost anything is like, how do I get to a testable arbitrary game state, like without having to play through the whole damn game, you know? So, I mean, the ability to like serialize the whole state and like load and reload is a good one. Just avoiding that. I'm always thinking about how to test, because that's just so scary to think of playing your game and having no command over it. So
Yeah, that's a lot of my early games where I just had to play through the whole thing to get to where I want. That was like early college, I think.
yeah.
Someone by my level or short.
So, well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we still have pizza to eat and some drinks to drink. If you guys want to, we'll turn the lights on. We could just like hang out, and if everybody wants to head out, like that's cool. But
Thank you.
so, yeah.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get lights.
There we go.